Daf Yomi Tractate Zevachim, page 59b. On the top, we were talking about the amount of offerings that Solomon made. We left off with the verse that said, "And Solomon offered for the sacrifice of peace offerings, which he offered to the Lord, 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep." 1 Kings 8:63. And now we're at the words "Kishe'ata magia lecheshbon olot," up to there, close to the top of 59b. And when you arrive at the calculation of burnt offerings in the number of cubits for each altar, this was greater than that. Meaning, Solomon sacrificed more offerings per square cubit on Moses' altar than he did on the altar in the temple upon its inauguration. Therefore, it is difficult to suggest that the altar in the temple was not large enough to accommodate the number of offerings that Solomon sacrificed. Rabbi Yossi presents an alternative understanding of the verse. Rather, what is the meaning of the phrase "because the copper altar was too small to receive"? It is not referring to the altar built by Solomon, but rather to the copper altar built in the time of Moses, which was disqualified from use from the day of the temple's inauguration on. Rather than stating outright that the altar became disqualified, the verse employed euphemism, like a person who says to his friend, "So and so is a dwarf," and what he really means to say is that he is disqualified from performing temple service. Similarly, rather than stating outright that the altar built in the time of Moses became disqualified, the verse states that it was too small to accommodate the offerings sacrificed in the temple. So it just shows a sensitivity, even for inanimate objects. There's a sensitivity to not make them feel ashamed, as it were. Rabbi Yehuda Shabir, come on, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda, God Loyo, the Tanya Chamesh Amos Orech, the Chamesh Amos Roichav, the Varin Savan de Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara asks, and how does Rabbi Yehuda respond to this claim? Rabbi Yossi is saying, well, meaning his claim is persuasive. The Gemara explains that Rabbi Yehuda conforms to his standard line of reasoning as he says that the altar that Moses built was large. As it is taught in the Braita, the verse states that the altar built in the time of Moses was 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. 5 cubits long, a cubit is like a foot and a half. 5 cubits long, say it's 2 feet, so it's 10 feet. It's not that big. I guess they thought it was big. 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. Exodus 27, verse 1. The matters in the verse are to be understood as they are written. This is the statement of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Never kan revuah, lahalan revuah, ma lahalan me'emtziut, hayam moded, afkan me'emtziut, hayam moded. Rabbi Yehuda says, it is stated here that the altar built in the time of Moses was square. Exodus 27 verse 1. And it is stated there in Ezekiel's prophetic description of the altar that it is square, Ezekiel 43:16. Just as there in Ezekiel's vision, he was measuring the distance in each direction from its center, so to here the verse was measuring the altar that Moses built from its center. Accordingly, the altar built by Moses was 10 cubits by 10 cubits. As a result, Solomon sacrificed more offerings per square cubit of space on the altar in the temple than he did on the altar built by Moses. It is therefore possible that the altar in the temple was not sufficient to accommodate the offerings, and Solomon consecrated a temple courtyard to serve as an altar. והאריאל 12 אמה לכל רוח. או אינו אלא 12 ה-12 כשהוא אומר, ארבעת רעביו, מלמד שמאמצע הוא מודד. The Gemara asks, and from where do we derive that the altar mentioned here in Ezekiel was measured from its center? The Gemara answers, as is written, and the hearth shall be 12 cubits long, by 12 cubits long, by 12 cubits long, by 12 cubits wide, square to its four sides. Ezekiel 43:16. The Gemara asks, does the verse mean 12 cubits in each direction from the center of the altar, so that in total it was 24 by 24 cubits, or perhaps the altar was only a total of 12 by 12 cubits? The Gemara answers, when the verse states to its four sides, it teaches that Ezekiel was measuring from the center of the altar. Rabbi Yossi, ki gamir gezeira shava. בגבוה הוא דתניא ושלוש אמש כמוסו דברים ככסבון דברי רב Yehuda. The Gemara asks, and how does Rabbi Yossi respond to Rabbi Yehuda's claim? The Gemara answers, when he learns the verbal analogy, he learns with regard to the altar's height, as it is taught in the Bride, so the verse states with regard to the altar built in the time of Moses, and its height shall be 3 cubits. Exodus 27 verse 1. The matters in the verse are to be understood as they are written, meaning that the height of the altar was 3 cubits. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Never kan ravua, v'never halan ravua. Ma lehalan gava b'shnayim v'alko, afkan b'shnayim v'alko. Rabbi Yossi says, it is stated here, that the altar built in the time of Moses was square. Exodus 27 verse 1. And it is stated there, that the incense altar was square. Exodus 30 verse 2. The verbal analogy indicates that just as there, with regard to the incense altar, its height was twice its length, so to here the height of the altar built in the time of Moses was twice its length, meaning 10 cubits. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, v'halo kvar ne'emar, v'yesechot tzomei amla v'koyma, 5 amos. אפשר כהן עומד על גבי המזבח יבוא את ביודוי וכל המרואין או יסבים בחוץ. Yehuda said to Rabbi Yossi, but isn't it already stated the length of the court shall be 100 cubits and the height 5 cubits? Exodus 27 verse 18. Is it possible that the priest would stand atop the altar and hold the items with which he perform the sacrificial service in his hand, and the whole nation could see him from outside the courtyard? That would constitute a lack of respect for the service in the tabernacle. Amar lo Rabbi Yossi v'lo kvar ne'emar v'et kalei chaser yizbazach she'ar chaser asher al hamishkan ve'al mizbeach ma mishkan 10 amos המזבח 10 amos ve'omer kalayim 15. Rabbi Yossi said back to him, but isn't it already stated, and the curtains of the court, and the screen or the door of the gate of the court, which is by the tabernacle and by the altar, Numbers 4:26. This verse juxtaposes the tabernacle with the altar to teach that just as the tabernacle was 10 cubits high, so too the altar was 10 cubits high. And another verse states the curtains were 15, to be continued.